So, throughout the conversation, we've dropped some different ideas going organic, being mindful of eating clean animals, the fulvic acid, humic acid, fermented foods. But let's zoom back, given everything we've shared today about the current landscape of glyphosate. What's the playbook moving forward? Somebody like yourself in the know, what are you doing day in, day out to protect yourself from this?
Yeah, there's some other things that I believe in, and one of them that we haven't mentioned yet is sunlight. I think sunlight exposure is extremely healthy. I'm a big fan of sunlight, and I think and of course, sulfur is something I talked a lot about in my book, and we didn't really bring it up here, but sulfur is a big deal. Sulfur doesn't have a minimum daily requirement. The government thinks there's plenty of it, but the problem is that glyphosate is a train wreck for the whole process that makes the sulfate. And that's a pretty big part of my book where I talk about sulfate. And those are enzymes that have that glyphosate susceptibility motif. Many of them involved in sulfate processing have that motif. And so they're going to be sensitive to glyphosate. And sulfate deficiency is a key feature of autism, both in the gut. There's an enzyme in the gut that makes the sulfated phenols. It's this disrupted. Sulfate in the brain, heparan sulfate synthesis is disrupted. And the autistic brains have low levels of heparan sulfate in the brain ventricles, which is crucial for the development of the brain. So that's really critical. I think sulfate and then systemic sulfate deficiency, like lining all the blood vessels. You have these sulfated glycosaminoglycans and the sulfomucins in the gut. These things are all super important for the health of the circulation and the health of the gut. And the glyphosate disrupts the enzymes that make the sulfate out of sulfur sources. So, a lot of people have sulfur sensitivity. They can't eat sulfur-containing foods. I think that's a consequence of glyphosate exposure because glyphosate is disrupting the enzymes that, for example, convert sulfite to sulfate or reduce sulfite to make methionine. Both of those pathways are disrupted by glyphosate. And so, sulfite is very toxic. And so then you can't eat, for example, wines that have sulfite. You can't drink those. And there are many people that have sulfur sensitivities. They try to avoid sulfur-containing foods, and they get sulfur deficiency systemically. And that's really bad because those sulfates are so important in your body, both for the development of the brain, for the circulation, the blood, lining the blood. There's all these sulfates that are bound to the epithelial cells, the endothelial cells lining the blood vessels. So sulfate deficiency. So that means eating a lot of sulfur-containing foods. And I'm a really big fan of onions and garlic. We use those all the time in our cooking. And of course, sulfur-containing meats are really good sources of cysteine, for example, and methionine. These are sulfur-containing amino acids. And so eating a lot of seafood. Seafood is a super healthy choice because it has lots of minerals. It's really you're looking for nutrient-dense foods when you eat. You don't want to have just empty carbs, like sugar. It's just sugar's a fine fuel, but doesn't have enough of those. It doesn't have any of those, minerals and vitamins and all the polyphenols and stuff that are in the vegetables. So just eating a rich diet of whole foods, green vegetables and cruciferous vegetables are fantastic, and I eat a lot of those as well. And that's the cabbage, for example. Sauerkraut's a great food because it's got both the fermented foods and the sulfur in the cabbage. And so fermented foods and cabbage, and then Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, broccoli, those are all cruciferous vegetables, which have a lot of sulfur. So my diet, I guess you would probably call it paleo, I think. I eat meat and mostly meat and vegetables, some fruits, not too many carbs. I'm happy to have potatoes and rice here and there, but I go low on the carbs, I guess is what I would say. And everything's whole foods. And of course, everything's organic, 100% organic.
Given the fact sulfate is so important to your diet, you actually call it the miracle worker in your book. Do you think supplementation of sulfate is something we should consider?
I do, and in fact, I think, there's a methylsulfonylmethane, MSM, and then there's this very controversial dimethyl sulfoxide. Have you heard of that?
DMSO?
That's a really in
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have an opinion on it?
Not really. It's not something I've really played around with.
Yeah, I'm playing around with it right now, and I'm not sure. I don't actually like supplements. I don't take any, pills, for example. I don't take any, prescription drugs, and I don't take any pills. But I do soak in Epsom salt baths pretty much every night. and just a handful. I don't do a large dose, just a little bit in the bath water, Epsom salts, because that's going to be sulfur. That's magnesium sulfate. Then magnesium is also an issue. We have a lot of problems with magnesium deficiency, so you can get both the magnesium and the sulfate from the Epsom salt bath, which I really like. And I'm almost afraid to say this because only just recently I've been playing around with DMSO, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. I just bought a book on it, and I'm reading about it, and I'm fascinated with it because DMSO, dimethyl sulfoxide, it's a really, really interesting molecule, and it attracts me because it has two methyls and it has a sulfur, right? So methylation pathways, sulfation pathways, and both of those are disrupted by glyphosate. So it feels to me like it's a miracle worker, theoretically, DMSO. And I've just been applying it topically, and so far so good. I feel like I've been sleeping. It's only been the last week, so this is brand new. I haven't talked about it before, so this is a new thing in this particular podcast interview. But so far, I feel quite positive about it, and it makes sense to me. And the other thing that's great about it is that it's natural. It's not synthetic. And I was really pleased to know that they get it from trees. So, because if it were synthetic, it wouldn't be. There's differences between the synthetic and the natural that I care about.
How do you feel about saunas as a modality to detox and then any specific value there getting glyphosate out of the body? And the
Yeah.
reason I ask it that way and I'm puzzled on if it would really do anything is because glyphosate becomes part of our proteins. So is there really a period of time that we have a chance at getting it out of the body before it just becomes part of us?
Yeah, I know. That's a big issue, isn't it? As far as whether it's available to get rid of. When it gets stuck into the proteins, it's very hard to get rid of it because you have to break down those proteins first and then release that glyphosate into the circulation and then to push it out through the skin when you I think the saunas are probably a good way to detox. I would think to push out even toxic metals, for example, or any kind of toxic would make sense to me that your body would want to sweat them out, to push those toxins out through the skin. It would be a great way to eliminate toxic exposures in general. Now, whether glyphosate is part of that mix or not, I'm not sure. But it would make sense. I mean, when you pee it out, so they do find it in your urine quite routinely, actually. Many people are contaminated with glyphosate in the urine, so it's being pushed out through the urine. So probably it would be pushed out through the skin as well if you sweat. I would think so.
Any value in getting tested to see your current glyphosate levels?
You can do that. Yeah, the question is how you interpret it. It basically, if you get urine glyphosate test, it's looking at mostly what your exposure over the last couple of weeks. So it's not gonna. You'd have to sort of do it multiple times to get a sense of how much variance there is in that exposure. Um, Certainly, you'd be very happy to find that you didn't have any. That would be terrific, and so it's something you can do.
Which ties back to
And if
what
it's sky high, you start to worry about where is it coming from, right? Because you could be eating organic and then it's sky high, and it's like, wait a minute, how come, you know, am I breathing it in from the air? Because it is in the air. I actually collected some rainwater in Cambridge at my lab at MIT, and I sent it off to Anthony Samsel, and he tested it and found glyphosate in it, in the rainwater. So it's in the rain, you know, which is scary.
you said there about a couple weeks. That was getting at what I was referring to with the sauna. The fact that since it is becoming part of us in our proteins, there is a limited window there where we can really see its impact before we absorb it and make it part of us.
Yeah, there's a certain percentage, and I think it's a small percent usually, that gets incorporated into your proteins, and the rest of it gets eliminated through feces or through urine or through sweating, various ways to get it out. But that small percentage accumulates. That's the dangerous part.
Okay.
So
Glad we
you're
clarified. I didn't
gradually
realize
getting,
there's only a small part that got incorporated.
but it accumulates over time, and that's the really dangerous thing because you get more and more as you live longer, and so then you start to get disease when you've lived long enough to accumulate enough glyphosate to be problematic.
Okay, so glyphosate's in the food, in the rainwater. What about just inhalation in the air?
I suspect so.
Waterways, other
Yes,
areas that we wanna be cognizant of protecting our bodies.
I want to go back to DMSO because that's another thing very interesting about it. And there's a a gas called dimethyl sulfide. So that's very similar to dimethyl sulfoxide, right? It just has the hydrogens and no oxygens, dimethyl sulfide. The methyls are two of those methyl groups, which are in the methylation pathways, right? But the dimethyl sulfide is produced by an organism that lives in shallow seas. And this is really, I was so fascinated when I read about this. And that organism is crucial. It releases that gas, which goes up into the air and seeds clouds. So it helps to make rain form over the ocean. And that organism is very sensitive to glyphosate. I found an article that showed that it gets killed by glyphosate. So you think of the Mississippi River and all that glyphosate coming down from all those crops and pouring out into the Gulf from the about mouth of the Mississippi River, killing off those guys who make the dimethyl sulfide, which then prevents the clouds from forming, which then makes the oceans hotter because there's more sun, heats up the oceans, and that's what's, killing the coral. So I think there could be a connection through all of that. The dimethyl sulfide gets oxidized up there in those clouds and gets converted to, guess what? Dimethyl sulfoxide, right? And then the rain actually dumps the dimethyl sulfoxide on the plants, on the land, and they love it. They take it up as a fertilizer to provide them with both the methyl groups and the sulfur. So I think that's a really super interesting cycle at the global level that's getting messed up by glyphosate. That's supplying those crop plants with very useful nutrients in terms of sulfur and the methyl groups. That's really fascinating to me.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
A lot of people don't know what glyphosate is, and I admit I didn't know what it was either back in 2010, 2011. They patented it to be used to strip metals off of pipes because it's very good at chelating metals. I think it was an accidental discovery.